So let's kind of get started with the day. Thinking about this morning, it was really hard for me because I know many of you in this room. Many of you have heard me talk about this. Many of you have probably seen different things about this. So how do I come here and share something with you that you've probably already seen? But then I've also talked to some of you that said, I hear it different every single time. It has different meaning to me every single time. But the reason why I really want to go through all of this today is because you're now, by being here today, you're a part of the community. And what you will learn from me and my team is that we don't take credit for all of this because everything that we do is from learning from you. So we learn from you, then we change things, then we adapt things, and then you apply things, and then we keep adding more and more people. And that's the idea. Everything we develop it with a universal concept in mind. How can it have the widest application? How can anybody pick it up and use it? This was not built for policymakers. This was not built for support coordinators. It was built for self-advocates and families to figure out how to have a good life by themselves without the need for a professional. And by building it that way, it makes it easy for the rest of us as professionals to use. And that's how we should build everything. What we have a tendency to do is to build ideas or build tools or build concepts for the professionals to use, and then they have to figure out how to interpret it. But we really need to start with building things that are common language that really make sense to any human being to pick up and be able to use. Now, that's not to say that some people don't need assistance with doing that. That's not what I'm implying at all. But our grounding of how we start building things has to come and start from that. So I want to kind of go through the history with you. I'm also sharing this message with you, so one, that you learn about it, but two, so that you're able to articulate it and explain it to others. Because I look to you as sort of the messengers of really ensuring that people know why you're talking about this. And when someone calls me and they say, oh my gosh, can you come train my staff on a tool? I tell them, no, that's not what I do. I don't train on tools. I train on concepts. I train on culture. I train on values. And you have to figure out how to make that into practice. I don't know what you do every single day. I don't know how to customize it to make it fit. This is not a one-size-fits-all. This is not a train-the-trainer model. This is something that we really need you to understand the why and the how so you can apply it to the what of what you're going to do. So as I share this with you and give you this history, not only listen because it's interesting, but listen because how can you then explain it to other people? So a lot of this work really comes from the community of practice. Having the privilege of working with states across the country as they wrestled with the principles and those sorts of things has really kind of moved it into policy change, really spread it across the country. But I want to spend a few minutes setting the stage. And as all of you know, everything that I'm sharing with you today is on our website. Every slide that you see, every PowerPoint, they're all there for you to use. The only thing that we ask is that you give us credit on the bottom of it. What we really would like for you to do is actually tell us how you used it. Because we're curious, but then we also know what needs to be changed and what needs to be adapted and what you're learning. We learned very quickly in this community of practice when we were going around the country that people were automatically under the assumption that we were only doing this to benefit the service system. You're only talking about families to save the service system money. You're only talking about families and putting more on the backs of families. And I will tell you, it's possible that people had that impression because we were working with our great partners, NASDs. But the reality is what the community of practice was trying to do was to actually show families, self-advocates, and the field itself that it was the families that were the backbone of the long-term service system. And that what we were trying to do is actually flip that and help the service system realize that they needed families, not the other way around, not how do we put more on the backs of families. The other thing that I think is so crucial and really hard to remember is that we think we're doing this because all we're thinking about are the budget cuts. And we're thinking about the fact that we have a direct support professional crisis. But we're really, really doing this because people with disabilities want a different life. They want access to all the rights the rest of the citizens in this country have. That's why we're doing this. We aren't doing this as a family support movement. We're doing this as a self-advocacy civil rights movement. That's why we're doing this. We're trying to help a group of people who have been oppressed by our long-term service system and the way it's been built have the life that they're deserved. That's why we're doing this. So when we're talking about setting the stage, yeah, all those other things are a reality, but the most important part is the expectations and cultures. We're trying to get the government, the bureaucracy, the providers, the expectations up to speed with what people really want. Many of you know my circles. I love these circles because I think it's really, really important. And I was telling the community practice teams yesterday, I could probably do a 2-hour presentation with just the slide. And why I think this slide is so very important, it helps on so many different levels. First of all, the slide on the way on the left-hand side for you should tell you that's what we think about. We all are our own individual self. We all have families and friends, and we all live in a community. And we all take it for granted. When we start talking about disability, we are talking about our field, the special education field, the long-term service field. We're talking about the middle circles. And what we're attempting to do with this framework is to actually move from the middle circles and move to the circles on the right-hand side. Because what we want to do is we don't want our services and supports to actually become the barrier to the relationships and the community life that we're actually trying to achieve. And if we start looking at our programs that way, if we start looking at our services that way, and if we start looking at our policies that way, and say, you know, you're right. We were doing what we thought was best, but now as we look at it and we look back on it, we recognize what we thought was best actually became the biggest barrier. So when I think about the new home and community-based service rule, that is probably making a lot of your lives very hectic and it's probably very annoying to a lot of you. If you truly think about the fundamental intent of that rule, it's exactly why you went into this field. It's exactly why you went in the field. So as a provider, as a state service system professional, as much the grind of trying to interpret and implement that rule, and as hard as that might be, it's exactly why you are coming to this field. You are coming to this field to give people good lives. And that rule finally is the federal government's recognition that the way things are funded will fundamentally help us do that better. What's hard about that is that the structures, the policies, the buildings, the program, and the staff that you have were built on the old model. So if you help them understand that what ultimately that rule is trying to help them achieve is what they really came to the field for, and that really what was getting in the way was all the old DNA of our field. And so how can you look at the circles on the right-hand side and say, this is what the rule intended. This is what we really want. We want to take people where they are, who they are, their values, their strengths, their experiences. We want to take all of their friends and families and ensure that they stay connected to them, to ensure that they reciprocate their relationships with them. And we also want to keep them connected to the communities that they grew up in and that they want to be a part of, and how to make them truly be a part of the fabric of their society. And so by truly integrating supports, the STAR that we'll talk about is a way to think about that, is a way to think about how can we utilize all of these resources and services and supports and bring them together so that they don't become the barrier, but they become the sort of leverage to that good life that you want for people. We talk about transitional change and transformational change. What you are embarking on, being a part of this journey with Charting the LifeCourse, is transformational change. So if you go back and you just change the title of something, or you go back and do one training, you're not making transformational change. You're making transitional change. Transformational change actually requires you to sort of rework the words you use, rework the values you have. And not just for one certain program. You've got to internalize it, and you've got to figure out all the different places that it can go. That's transformational change. And what you're going to see over the next 2 days is true transformational change. I mean, I can't begin to tell you how excited I am about these 2-day events, because I just am like, see? Look at all these people that have transformed their own thinking so that they can apply it day to day. And so what you're going to hear about is that journey of going from, what is this, to, okay, I can understand it and repeat it, to now I can't get it out of my thinking and helping me problem solve and think about the day-to-day work that I do. And that's what we hope that you will be a part of. This is sort of my evolution, this sort of journey. And I think it's important for you to know this history, because it wasn't just me, it was all of you. And there were a number of things that were happening. First of all, I've already mentioned the fact that I grew up as a family member. My mom and dad are here today. Will you raise your hand? Many of you know them, because if you know me, you know that my family comes with me everywhere, my whole family. So here they are today. But they also help me every single day go, this isn't working, this needs to work. How we can talk about this? How can we do these conversations? How can we change things? What's missing? How can we support the provider? How can we support the communication better? But also at the same time, as Kathy mentioned, I was part of the self-advocacy movement. And then I had the honor of being a part of the national movement to come together and have that conversation about how can we support families differently. And it was able to author the document that has the new definition for supporting families, and really started to kind of think about that. And then I ran into this LifeCourse framework that's been around for 50 or 60 years. It's a really old framework. It comes to us from the medical field. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the idea of thinking about transitions and trajectories. I fell in love with the idea of thinking about life stages and all the life domains. And so we took that and we adapted it. So it's built on a life course theory coming out of the medical health development model. But it's something to kind of really bring together and be able to communicate visually and verbally all of the great things that are happening in our field. The other thing that really impacted me personally at the time was I was finishing my PhD, and I had the privilege of interviewing parents who had gone through the Partners in Policy Making program that Missouri had been hosting for 16 years at that time. And what was so amazing about this was, absolutely, was the curriculum great? Absolutely. But the most important thing that I learned from those families was they didn't have a dream for their child. They had the skills, they knew how to navigate, they knew what their rights were, but they didn't know how to dream. They didn't have an expectation. They didn't know they had permission to dream. And that's a huge problem. That's a huge problem. And so I started to think, oh my gosh, what are we going to do about this? At the same time, the family to family team, I remember sitting in my office, and as you know me, I love flip chart paper. We got this flip chart paper out, and Jane St. John, please stand, and I sat in this office, and we talked about, how do we use words? Why do we use all these weird words in our field? Why aren't we saying things like, well, what does it mean to get your diagnosis? Well, we don't talk about that. And so we just started to kind of just use words to describe this. So we're federally mandated as a University Center on Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, as part of the Developmental Disability Act, to really provide information dissemination and to provide systems change work, policy, and research. And I was charged with information dissemination. And I was charged with, we need to know what training and information families, self-advocates, and professionals need. And I said, we can't keep getting that information the same way, and we can't keep providing it the same way. And so we said, what if we ask our stakeholders that come together every quarter to help us think about the types of questions or experiences families have across the lifespan, and then take that information and go back and make the different training and resources. So raise your hand if you're part of the family to family stakeholder group that's come to stakeholder meetings. So this group of people came together and for the last probably 10 years and have been having these conversations, and we'd go, great, thank you. And we created these big documents and all that stuff that Kathy was talking about, which was a really awesome thing. And we'd come back and we would decipher it. And we said, thanks. And they said, no, we wanted a life experience book. And we're like, well, what are you going to do with it? Well, we print 30,000 of those life experience booklets. I still have no idea what people do with them, but they like them. And parents call us and say, oh my gosh, that gives me the questions I need to think about. Because typically parent manuals just tell you the services you need to go through. And this helps me think about the life experiences. And so we started to really build upon that and really kind of move that. So then I had the privilege of meeting Nancy Thaler and Sharon Lewis when I went to the Delaware Leadership Institute and learned about the support of the companion model. I learned about all the stuff that was happening federally. And things just sort of took off after that. Nancy Thaler brought me into the state DD directors meeting nationally 6 years ago, almost to this day. And that's where I met Mary Lee Fay. And that's where I had the opportunity to meet our then director, Bernie Simons. And he said, I don't know what you're going to do, but just come back to the state of Missouri and come do something with the Division of Developmental Disabilities. And literally, that's kind of how the contract looked. And we started to work on what does supporting families look like in Missouri. And we had no idea where we were headed. But we had these sort of concepts floating in our head. The Family to Family had been working on this. The national agenda had been going on. And then out came this grant opportunity because Sharon was commissioner at the time. And I had the privilege of working with the NASD's team. So would the NASD staff stand up, please? Barb and Mary Lee. And we sat and struggled for a year, kept saying, what is this going to be? How is this going to be something different for our field? And the first thing we were charged and mandated to do was to develop a framework. So we got together and we had states apply. And we had 5 states apply, and Missouri served as the mentor state. So can those 5 states please stand up? So we have membership from 6 states of the community of practice. They'd probably agree with Kathy. We sat in this really hot room down at the Institute for Human Development, and we developed principles that would drive our project. And those principles are what you see today is now the Charting the LifeCourse Framework. And then last year, the NASD's membership came together, and state DD directors said, I want to be a part of that. I don't really know what it is, but I want to be a part of it. And 11 states applied and now have joined the community of practice, and we now have 17 states across this country. So could the 11 new states please stand up? Now this whole time that all this really cool stuff was happening and we were bopping around the country and sharing the energy, I had some amazing staff back home. And if it weren't for Rachel Hiles, you would not have the graphics that you have, you would not have the papers that you have, you would not have the PowerPoints that you have, you would not have the webinars, you would not have this live streamed, you wouldn't have it on Twitter and all that other stuff that generation loves to do. And so without Rachel back at home, without Jenny and Georgia and Catherine, who are probably out making it work somewhere else, this all would not have happened. So it's been truly an amazing journey. But so where are we going to go after today? Each one of you now can carry this and share this along the way. So I really wanted to take the time to share that history with you because I wanted you to see that even though you might not have been stood up as some of the originators or founders, everybody could raise their hand because you've all united together to continue moving this forward. So the thinking that really guides this, you're sitting there thinking, some of you are like, that's nothing new. We've talked about many of these things before. But what it does is it kind of brings them all together for you. And it gives you a way to visually articulate those and talk about those. It's a way for you, I keep saying, I can tell when I go into an organization or I go into a state and they start using different words, that I know that they're starting to make that transformation. When I don't hear the phrase family support anymore, but I hear the phrase supporting families. When I hear people start talking about trajectory. When I hear people say 3 buckets, first of all, other people must think we're crazy. I'm like, they know the framework. And when you start using those words, that's what's more important than the tools. The tools just help you get to that point. And so if it weren't for theories like self-determination, if it wasn't for the founders and the passionate people behind the person-centered thinking movement, if it wasn't for the self-advocacy movement and the family-driven movement and social capital and all those movements, we wouldn't be here today. This just kind of takes it all together and gives you a way to articulate all that into practice. So the Charting the LifeCourse Framework, our core belief of all people live, love, working, and playing. As you know, we do not talk about all people with developmental disabilities live, love, working, and playing. What we quickly dropped out of our vocabulary was creating separate frameworks, separate tools for people with disabilities. But we ensure that all of our tools and concepts are inclusive of people with disabilities. Because the more we create something separate for them, that means there's a different core belief about them as humans than there is for us. And that's going against everything the whole framework is built upon. We also know the concept of all. And this came from the fact that we're so focused on those inside the service system that we forget that that's the minority of people with developmental disabilities across our country. The majority of people with developmental disabilities may never touch the long-term service system. And I know this hurts our feelings, but believe it or not, some don't want to. Some do need us, but don't know about us. Some need us and aren't eligible to receive our services. So when we're thinking about a framework for all, this means it has to be inclusive of every single person, whether they're going to ever touch government services or not. And so how can we help all people think about this? And what's been amazing on this journey is that this really has nothing to do with disability anymore. I have educators. I have people who are getting ready to retire. I have college students that don't have disabilities. I have foster care systems. I have healthcare providers. I have recreational specialists. Again, nothing to do with our field, saying, this framework works for us. Can we use it? And wow, how cool that the developmental disability community can give something to the greater communities and the greater service systems. It's amazing. We also know that we need to think about the sort of different groups of people within our context of all. And so how are we thinking about strategies and policies and supports inside and outside of our service systems for all of these different groups of people? When we really started to work in Missouri and work on systems change, I was amazed. Our solutions that we're so proud of are one-size-fits-all solutions. When we know the population of people we work with is not a one-size-fits-all. There's different ways to apply it and think about it. So when we're writing policies, we need to remember this. When we're trying to help our staff interact with people, we need to remember this and give them tools and strategies for doing that. I might use the exact same concepts or even a tool for every single person I interact with, but how I use it and apply it is very, very different. So if I'm going in and I'm working with somebody in an institution, I can use that same tool, but I use it differently. I could use that same tool with somebody who will never, ever touch the service system. So what we don't do is really help people build the skill sets and think about all the different ways to apply different things. And that's the beauty of what you guys bring to the table. Every one of you represents some, one, or all of those different types of ways. So when you go back and you're training and you're interpreting and you're thinking about implementing this, don't go back and implement it for your agency. Go back and think about how your agency is broken up. You break it up by life stages, you could break it up by where people live, and think about all those different ways to do that. We also know that we're expanding to the all. And so when we think about the person within the context of the family, we've got to stop thinking person-centered supports, family supports. We really have to be thinking to ourselves, if I'm going to provide really good person-centered supports, which is what we're mandated to do in our field, then that means I have to think about that person within the context of their family. And I can't keep ignoring that, even if that family annoys me, right? Even if that family is maybe not so good for that person. Because the reality is families are messy, they're sticky, they're not all great. And so as a field, it is much, much easier to ignore the family, because then we don't have to get involved in that stuff. Well, that's not real life. And so we have to change that mentality. I can't tell you how many times over the last 5 years I'll go to conferences and providers will say, oh, we don't go to that family support stuff, that information. We don't need that. We're providers. You need it more than anybody needs it. Because you have to figure out how to partner with families. I mean, I can't tell you how many times that I've talked to my mom and dad about our provider, thinking, my gosh, the resources that they're not engaging with by not engaging with the family. Let alone if something happens and mom and dad pass away, they could totally mess up the funding source. If that's all we care about. They could totally mess it up because we have never engaged the family to let them know not to leave all the money to their child. So we have to programmatically and ethically involve the family. We also know that people with developmental disabilities, 89% of the over 5 million people with developmental disabilities live with their families. If I went out on the street in Kansas City and said, where do you think people with developmental disabilities live? There is a big assumption they live in a group home somewhere provided by the government. So part of this conversation is to help people get back into reality. Use the data that you have available to you to say, wow, actually you're right. Who do we listen to more? We listen more to providers when we're working on legislative and systems change issues, but who should we really be listening to more? Are the families that need our support and don't necessarily want all of our support, but if we would just give them enough, they can make it day by day. But we wait and we force them into a crisis and then make them prove their crisis, not only once, but twice, and then maybe you can get our services. And so we've got to change that. We've got to change that somehow. So we also have to be thinking about all of the aspects of families. So are we teaching our staff about family systems theory? Are we teaching our staff that even though you go into the home of a 14-year-old with autism, you've got to pay attention to the fact that mom might have a newborn baby at home, or mom might be taking care of their aging parents that's living in the living room? You have to take all of that context in mind. So absolutely, every individual member's life stage is very, very important, and how can we help every person in that life stage be supported in that life stage? But then how does it all kind of interact together? When mom and dads are seeing their sons and daughters graduating from high school, never did they dream that now that they're 21, they're going to actually have to start paying attention to 24-hour services that they're going to have to provide again. They're thinking, oh, they're 21. Everybody else is going, my children are going to finally launch out of my house. And families are going, they're 21. I've got the next 50, 60, 70 years to provide this day-to-day support. And so how do we help that? How do we make that not happen to people? How do we make that not be a cliff that people talk about at 21? It's our policies, it's our cultures, it's our interactions, starting in early childhood, starting at the hospital when they get that diagnosis. We have to change those conversations. We have to help people see the expectations. We have to help people see that there's possibilities and that there's supports available for them. We also have to recognize the reciprocal role of all family members. And it's funny, so we kind of like go, 89% of all people with developmental disabilities live at home with their family or supported somehow by their family. And half of us are sitting there going, oh my gosh, I don't want to live with my family forever. And the other half are going like, oh my gosh, well that's not very independent. Like we got to get these people out of their families. And then you start looking actually at the data of Americans right now. Do you know where 30, 40-year-olds are living right now? They're all moving back home with their families. And they're all okay with that. We were talking about this last night. They are all okay with that. So if we look at the trends of the disability field, don't look at them as if they're just random trends. The other trend of our field that kind of just blows my mind is we talk about the high divorce rate in the disability field, as if there's not a high divorce rate for the rest of the country. Oh my gosh, that kid with autism causes more divorce. No, there's high divorce rates across the country, and yes, having additional stress without support might cause divorce. It's a lack of support. So we need to really be thinking about that. Everybody knows that the caring for, caring about slide is one of my favorite slides. Because what we know, if we know that families, it's really 100% of families need to be supported in their conversations around how to support their family member, then we need to figure out the caring for and the caring about for families. We need to figure out ways that we're supporting both of those. Because we have a tendency to only think about the caring for. And we say, oh, well, they have housing because they live with their mom or their brother. Oh, they can provide day-to-day supports for them too. So we kind of got that figured out, and in some ways that's the easiest part up there. So again, what does our field like to do? Ignore the messy. We don't want to talk about love. And that's what caring for is love. And that's what families bring, is love. They bring that commitment, the relationships. They're going to be there no matter what. We don't get to leave at 5 o'clock when our shift ends. We don't get to leave after the 10th time we've been hit by our sibling or our family member. We are here. We're here for the long haul. And so how to help us support that and be a part of that. But most importantly, how to help us be in those roles. As providers, support coordinators, family members, are you thinking about the other roles that you bring to your life? When does mom and dad get to be mom and dad? Or are they always a support care provider to their child? When do they get to just come over to dinner to their house? How are we helping people reciprocate? How are we helping people call their family, bring birthday cards if that's a tradition of their family? That's the essence of your quality of life. That's what you live and breathe for every single day. So if you're talking about how am I going to provide good person-centered supports, then you should go back and ask yourself, are we helping the people we support stay connected to people that they love? I can look in plans. When I look in person-centered plans and I see the pretty decent ones, I see outcomes related to relationship building in there. But we always act like you got to go meet some stranger off the street to have that goal. Why do you not have an outcome in every single plan that says stay connected to their family? I mean, that should be mandated. How am I going to help them stay connected and have a reciprocal relationship with their family members? So we really, really need to change this. Because what we know from people who are older that say, what's the most important thing in my life? I look back at it with my relationships. What's the thing we know about people with disabilities that receive our support? They're lonely. They don't have friends besides their housemates or their paid staff. So true safety, true quality of life, it comes from relationships. We know it, we say it, we got to put it into practice. We also know that our family gives us lots of things. Some things we want, some things we don't want. Sure, I'd love to be a little shorter, but thanks to my mom and dad, I'm not, right? So our family brings a lot of genetics, they bring a lot of culture, they bring a lot of experience, again, good and bad. They bring reputations of your community. People know you, they know the family name. How are you utilizing that? How are you building upon that? Or maybe you're serving people who aren't connected to their families anymore. They didn't just land here without all of that. So many people want to stay connected to their roots. I always think about, if you don't understand how my little brother grew up, if you don't understand that for some reason when he came to us as a foster child, there was something about seatbelts And if you don't understand that we enforced in his head since he was a very young child that the car does not move until your seatbelt is on, and you wonder why he has behavioral incidents in the car. I guarantee the staff got in the car. His anxiety just went off because that person's seatbelt was not on. And now he has added medicine and an additional behavior support plan because he whacked that person because they didn't have their seatbelt on. So understanding the history and understanding the experiences, you're not going to get that from anybody but the family. So how can you help know that? How can you help get to know that? So if someone doesn't know their family right now, how are you helping to understand their history in other ways? But more importantly, how are you helping them find someone that loves them and that is committed to them? So we know the good life is a journey, and it's working towards getting there. And that's what we're all going to be doing over the next couple days. We know that we want both the individual members to have the outcome of productive, good, self-determined lives. But we want to add to our field the dynamic of helping that whole unit really get there and seek there. We also know that family is not defined the way family used to be defined. It's not just mom and dads. It's not just siblings. It's defined how the person defines it. The other thing that we ignore in our field is that people with developmental disabilities can actually have their own families. And oh my gosh, they might have sex and have their own children. You better not tell parents that. Don't tell them. So how are we supporting the whole family, whatever that person defines as their family? You know, thinking about different families, is my little brother lives in a companion model right now, and so his companion moved in, his name is Coach. Well, he had a fiance at the time, and his fiance had a child. And now all of a sudden, Eric has another family. Well, oh my gosh, they might want him on a holiday? You might want to hang out with them instead of us? I mean, so we also have to learn how to share. You know, all of you that have to share your children with your in-laws and all those other things, or divorced families, like that's almost what we have to help parents understand, is how can we create and exist and allow this sort of coexistence of different types of family membership. We also know that we talk about the trajectory towards a good life. The good life phrase, you know, it's not the greatest phrase, but every single person understands it in this room. Until you come up with a better one for me to put there, that's the one we're going to use. So good life. I can walk up to anybody. I can walk up to a child. I could walk up to someone with significant disabilities. I could walk up to a legislator and say, define what your good life means. And they can tell me. So that's why we use that word. But what I also think it's important for our field to recognize is we have to be thinking about transitions. And we have to be thinking about the role of supports. And the role of supports is to find out what that good life is. So when we're saying, oh, we have to have a person-centered planning meeting, if we don't know where they want to go, I don't understand how you can write outcomes. I don't understand how you could actually provide day-to-day support if you have no idea what they define as their good life. We do it all the time. I hound this into my information and resource families staff. And I say, even when somebody calls with a quick question, if you don't really understand why they're asking that question, what to help them get to, you're not providing good supports to them. Because we know, especially families, don't really know the questions that they really have. They're just given a bunch of words and a bunch of things they think they need because people told them that, but that's not really what they want. And that's really not necessarily, they just don't know how to ask the questions because they don't know what the questions are. So it's our job to help people and guide them towards this. And if somebody gets off of their trajectory, support shouldn't just put them on a different trajectory. Support should say, how do I get them back on their trajectory line? But that's not what our support system does. Our support system doesn't even ask them their trajectory, but they say, okay, now you're in our service system, we're going to give you a supports trajectory. As opposed to saying, how can what I'm offering you get you back on that path or support you up on that path and keep you up there? We also know life transitions. When I know that policies drive our field. I know that we can't talk about employment or even mention employment till they're 14 because that's what the IDA says. Really, guys? Really? Really? I've had support coordinators say, I can't believe the Division of DD is making me think about employment for the 4-year-olds I'm supporting. I'm not going to ask that question. That doesn't make sense. And I said, well, you're not supposed to ask them about employment, but you need to start putting the seeds of expectation about employment in the minds of moms and dads when they're 4 years old. And how do you do that? You do it the same way you do for any other kid. Are you imitating playing? Does she try to pretend to be you on the phone? Do you talk about what she wants to be when she gets older? Do you give her chores to do? Do you help her volunteer? Those are the seeds to employment. That doesn't mean they have to go to a VR counselor. Experiences. This is the other thing that I hope the framework has brought to our field. It's talking about life experiences. Nobody showed up at our house while Eric was growing up and said, does he have friends? Does he play outside in the backyard? Is he learning about risk naturally like all the other 12-year-olds? Nobody showed up and said to us, does he do these things? If you look at the field, the medical field of anticipatory guidance, big, huge word, all it means is, are you helping people understand the next stage of life experiences? Every one of us are responsible for that in every conversation that we have. But we think somebody else is going to do it. So then nobody does it. Nobody does it. So then when parents get to be 18, 19, 20, their child becomes that age, and they go, oh, I didn't know that employment was expected. That's because nobody told them. Nobody started helping them understand life experiences. So anticipatory guidance, it happens naturally when you go to the doctor. It's not forced. They didn't have to sign a HIPAA agreement to do it to you. They just say to you, what's going on? You're turning 65. You're turning 14. Have you thought about? That is anticipatory guidance. That's what we should be providing to people. So when people say to me, well, how do you provide good service coordination? It's not the piece of paper. It's not your plan. It's the anticipatory guidance. It's the conversations. It's the expectations. It's that kind of stuff that are missing in the lives of families. Nobody is giving that to them. So everybody should be giving that to them. So you wonder why they want to talk to other families and why it's so important? Because that's the kind of stuff they're talking to them about. So if you don't feel like doing it, then you better make sure that you are connecting them to peer support. So the life domains. The life domains came about because our field focuses only on health and safety. We have to change that conversation. We have to move the conversations to the other quality of life domains. This is a visual to remind us to do this. And many of you know that I use the thing, these are the things we talk about when we go to a party. Are we really, when we sit down and plan with somebody, we should think about, what would I talk to somebody about at a party? Well, the first thing that you would do when you talk to somebody when you go to a party is you say, where do you work? What do you do during the day? Right? And they tell us. And then that kind of breaks the ice because that's kind of a normal American thing to say. And then you go, really? Do you live in this subdivision? Do you know these people? And you start kind of talking about where you live and the people you know. Now you just hit two of the other icons up there. And then you've had a few cocktails and you start talking about aging and that your knees hurt and your eyes are going bad and that your hair is turning gray. And you start talking about healthy living, right? Luckily at parties we don't sit there and talk about alternatives to guardianship and supported decision making, but those come next, right? You do. And then we start talking about citizenship and advocacy and about what you do around the community and how you're truly a fabric of the community. And I will tell you, we're working on changing the name of that icon because of some of the work that we're doing with you. Because although when we see that word citizenship, we think about what I'm doing to the community. When some of the families see that word, they think about their legal citizenship in this country. And so what we've learned from doing stuff with you and taking this around the country is that it's not just the icons, it's not just the interpretation, but it's the words that we sometimes use. That's why we have to hear back from you. We need to hear back from you so you don't just change this in your state, but we change it for the nation. 3 buckets. I talked about them earlier. Again, every single interaction you have with a self-advocate or family, you should be saying to yourself, how am I ensuring that their 3 buckets are being met? How am I ensuring that they have the information, the skills, and the knowledge that they need for whatever is going on in their life? How am I making sure that they have other people that they can talk to? There's this big word called self-efficacy. And it's about having confidence in yourself. That comes from talking to our peers. That comes from 2 girlfriends going to the bathroom together and chit-chatting. That comes from standing out in the parking lot after you drop your kindergartner off and only talking to the kindergarten parents that are out there crying. That peer relationship, that peer experience, it comes from connecting to people that have the same lived experience as you. We know in this country, community in a whole, not just the disability field, is really hard. We're very isolated even amongst ourselves without disabilities. We have to be intentional. We have to be purposeful to ensure that people with disabilities and their families are connected to one another. It could be virtually at 3 in the morning. It could be through their faith-based community. It could be on the sidelines of a soccer field. I don't care where it happens. How are you ensuring they have somebody else in their life that understands, that they can talk to, that they're not feeling alone? Those are the 2 things that we hear from families, the over 2,600 families that call our Family-to-Family Resource Center. I don't have the information that I need, and I feel alone. We ignore those 2 things and we rush straight to the goods and service bucket. What services can we throw at them? Or what services can we put them on a wait list for? We've got to address the first 2 buckets every single time. Addressing all 3 is what we need to move our field to do. Integrate support. The other thing that I really think the framework is bringing to the field, we can do anything with the STAR. And Sharon Spurlock here, she taught us that you can try to stump the STAR, and she hasn't done it yet, right? Where did this come from? It came from us having really in-depth conversations about what the phrase natural support means. What does the phrase natural support mean? Nobody knows. Everyone defines it completely differently. We say it like it's a good thing. Well, let me help you get some natural supports. And then we say it like a bad thing and go, you have natural supports. You don't need our services. Right? So we don't use the phrase natural supports anymore. We don't want to use phrases that people don't know what they mean, or they can be used against us. So we started talking about integrated supports. And we started with just 4. And we talked about natural supports can kind of be defined in 2 big things. It either means people in your life, aka relationship-based supports, neighbors, coaches, parents, siblings, people that do stuff because they have a relationship with you and they're not paid. The other phrase, natural supports, to some people mean, that other stuff in the community that's not paid services. So going to church or, going in, to different the movies or whatever. So community is also another part of natural supports. But we also started to recognize that every single person probably in this room has a phone. Technology is a part of the day-to-day fabric of your life. But it's not for people with disabilities. So how do we actually elevate it to the same level as the other part of supports? And so we ended up with 4. And then Connecticut came along in the community of practice and said, why do we always assume all the supports have to come from everybody else? What does the person bring to the table? You are totally ignoring the assets, the strengths, the experiences, and the resources of the person. And so when somebody calls us and say they need support, we jump to all this outside stuff. I need assistance with transportation. Okay, let me get you sheriff fare down there in the green part. As opposed to saying, do you think you'll ever learn how to drive? Do you know how to ride a bike? Do you know how to learn how to take the bus? And so we can start going around that STAR and really thinking about this. This is not anything new. This is just problem solving. And every one of you are doing it right now. You're sitting there going, what do I need to do? I need to go check my computer. I need to go check my email as soon as she's done with this. I've got to go out and talk to my friend or call my husband, right? I got to figure out what I'm going to eat for dinner. Are we going to buy out, or what do you think they're going to do about this? You are constantly running through this. Families, when they have a child with a developmental disabilities, somehow forget how to problem solve. It's almost like it's too confusing, and people have convinced us that we need a professional to do it for us. So we almost call and rely on and say, you know what, my son's aging, what am I supposed to do? My son's getting out of high school, what am I supposed to do? Well, what did you do for your other son? Or my son needs a place to live. And parents said, do I need to call the regional office and ask them if that's okay? No, you don't. You need to go find them a place to live. Call a real estate agent. Go find apartments for rent. We have really, really made it so that families don't think about how to problem solve the way they do everything else. We have to help them realize you problem solve the whole rest of your life. You can problem solve this, and we can problem solve it with you. You might not know all the answers in some of those buckets, but we're here to help you. So, focusing only on eligibility supports, you're here to say you're creating an all-green life. And an all-green life could take people where they don't want to go. But an all-purple life could also do the same thing. If you rely only on family and friends, and they burn all those bridges, that could take people where they don't want to go. So your job is to stay as integrated as possible. Don't ever become one color. So when I'm working with that person in an institution or the person in a group home, I'm going in to do a quality assurance or person-centered, or I'm the direct support staff, I should be saying to myself every few minutes, is this an all-green life? What can I do to make it not an all-green life? How can I make sure I'm building relationships? How can I make sure I'm going to do stuff in the community? Do they know how to use technology? Am I building their skill sets? If I'm somebody out in the community that doesn't have access to green, I don't just say, just wait for the green to come about, and your name pops up on the wait list. I need to say, how do I help them find those other things or build those other things? You can use the star with anybody you interact with. Here's Eric's star. Eric's star really helped us start thinking about all the relationships in his life. How do we maintain those? How do we keep those? But how does his staff also understand how important all of them are? At the core of this, though, is self-advocates and families have got to drive every single thing that we do. We don't just check in with them and let them know after we've developed it. They've got to be at the table. We keep creating things they don't want. And the only way to stop doing that is to have them at the table. It slows our process down. It's much, much harder. Sometimes they say really annoying things that really make us really second-guess ourselves. But that's when the change really occurs. We need that. We need that nagging and that annoyance and that difference and that non-agreement with us in order to move our field. And so it takes time, and it's hard, and it's messy. So how can we move that from principles to practice? We have our core beliefs. You are going to learn today about all of the principles and how they're applied. You're also going to learn how they're applied to policy change, practice change, and culture change. You're also going to hear it focusing on some big major areas. How are we changing the conversations at front doors? How are we changing planning and support coordination? How are we thinking about supporting families around employment outcomes? How are we helping family networks and family leaders and families get the information and training that they need? How are we helping people reframe? And how are we also changing policies through the lens of this framework? And if you notice, I've not mentioned any tools to you. You should not be here to become trained on tools. You should come here to hear people's journey about learning about the principles so they figured out how to use those tools in their practices because they wanted to adopt the principles in their life or in their organizations or in their policies. We've got to do that across the lifespan, and we've got to really bring things together. So this slide summarizes the whole thing. We're here to talk about individual people so they can have good lives. We do that within the context of the family. We do that thinking about every life domain and how they're interconnected and how we need to focus on one, but they're connected to the others. We need to think about the 3 buckets of supports every single time, the information, the peer support, and the goods and service needs. And we also have to do that through the lens of the integrated support star. And so how are we thinking about all those types of supports every single time? Thinking about their transition and their trajectory across their entire lifespan. Thinking about where they're at now and where they're headed, but also focusing on their lived experience from where they're coming from. That is the LifeCourse Framework. That is the Charting the LifeCourse Framework that you're going to hear about and share with one another your experiences and where we're going to take this. I am so proud and just so excited about the next 2 days. And I just want to welcome you and thank you for coming to Kansas City.